And hi everyone, welcome to eLearnChat, where you always learn something new. I am joined today by Leslie Price, or Grandma as we like to call her, Granny.
Granny.
Yes, Granny. She's with www.learnappeal.com. It's a great project. We always talk about it. Go visit the site. They're doing some incredible things with remote learning and in places that they don't even have basic internet. And it's pretty cool. Just take a look at what they do. I think you'll really enjoy it. And we also have Harold running the video switcher and the mixer. And just wanted to make a quick announcement. I will be talking at the video show. It's actually called The Video Show. I think it was called the Government Video Show last year. They changed the name. They made it more, I guess, corporate and government. So it's both. And I'm going to be doing a talk on getting started with video broadcasting for internal and external applications. So that should be fun. We're presenting on Thursday, the 5th of December, I think 11:15 to 12:15. Should have a fun time there. And today we've got two great guests, good friends. We've got Margie Meacham and Joe Ganci. They're back. We had a problem with the show last time where a computer just went down for no apparent reason. Never actually were able to figure out why. And it never happened again. So not sure. Might have been an errant chatbot or something in the stream. But here we go. This show is sponsored by Relate Corporation at www.relate.com, your training and video partner.
Hello, I'm Peter Baker. Please visit voiceovermasterclass.com to see details of the training courses I have on offer for new and existing voice talents to further their career by enhancing voice and technical skills, as well as essential marketing tips. And
we are here. And right at the top, you'll see Margie Meacham and Joe Ganci. We've got our semi-Brady Bunch layout. Maybe it's Hollywood Squares today. But Margie, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm based outside of Phoenix, Arizona. What I do is I help people apply neuroscience and artificial intelligence to enhance learning and performance. The reason I got into that is because as a little girl, I had a lot of trouble learning how to read. And it turned out that I'm dyslexic. So what I discovered is understanding the brain is very powerful and can really help you learn better. And that's true for everybody. So we're all unique, but we have some powerful information coming out of the neurosciences that's giving us as learning professionals some real insights. And more that's converging with work on artificial intelligence, where these two disciplines actually are, they're really looking at the same thing, neural networks. And so using both of those lenses is really allowing us to do a lot of very cool things to help people learn.
That's great. And I know Margie, she's got a lot of passion for what she's talking about. And in the upper right corner, we've got an old friend. He's not old, he's just an old friend.
Normal.
Joe Ganci, also known as eLearning Joe. Hey, Joe, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, before I tell you about myself, Margie was too modest probably to say so, but she has a great book out called Brain Matters that you should consider, and that it's become a favorite of mine, and I peruse it quite a bit. Oh, I should put it straight up, but I can't figure out how. Okay, there we go. So yeah, Brain Matters, very nice book. Not too thick, so it's a quick read, but it's a really good one. So yes, my name is Joe Ganci. I've been creating learning since, before a lot of people were born today. 1983, I was still in college and getting my computer science degree, and fell in love with the idea of using computers to teach. So many people today are shocked to hear that e-learning, for instance, started before the 90s. A lot of people guess it was in the 90s. Some of them even guess it was in the last 10 years. No, e-learning started way back in the 60s. Of course, it wasn't called e-learning, it was called computer-based training, but the same concept, of course. So I learned and fell in love with the idea of combining my love of writing, my love of reading and teaching, and my love of computer programming to create learning way back then, and never look back. I still love what I do today. And I work with a lot of different clients. I'm a lone wolf in a way, although I don't howl as much as I used to, but still I really enjoy what I do.
And Joe is a great teacher. I've heard from a lot of people that have attended his classes. He's a lot of fun to take a class with, and he knows a lot, and that helps.
Thank you.
Well, that's great. You know, neuroscience is finally making it where it should be, where people are actually going, oh, what's that? They're paying attention more, and they're realizing that it not only has scientific but practical applications. So you guys are doing, you've been doing a webinar series, but you're going to be doing seminars soon on how you can apply this on chatbots and artificial intelligence. Tell us a little bit about the seminar that you guys are doing.
Sure, I'll jump in first, and then I'm sure Joe. What makes us a great team is we can fill each other in. You know, anything I miss, I know he'll catch. We did this because we were chatting at a conference, and we said, you know, we're really interested. We were both really interested in what's happening with chatbots, and that they weren't being used in learning effectively, in our opinion. And that's still true. People are just starting to explore it. And what I mean by a chatbot, just in case anybody doesn't know, you've all used them. If you logged on to a site and looked for information, and a little bubble pops up and says, "Hi, can I help you?" Might be a real person behind there, but more and more often it's an algorithm. And your brain really doesn't care. And that's the fascinating thing. We've all been exposed to so much digital communication and learned that there's a human behind that now when there isn't always a human, we still respond the same way, even when we know that that's not true. So what that means is you can now create these experiences in your e-learning that are far more realistic to the brain than a branching scenario that we would build in a more typical way with stock photos and, you know, or cartoons and very, very rigid kind of answer cadence back and forth, because we can make that chatbot a lot more flexible, and the brain perceives it much more flexibly. So what we've done is we've put together an online workshop where you learn how to build one, how to integrate it into either a e-learning course or your LMS or a website, and how to use it to advance learning. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joe to talk about some of the particular things we're going to cover in the workshop. And he didn't know I was going to do that. So
take it away, Joe.
I'd also like to add, Margie just talked about scenario-based training, or branching scenarios, and I've been a big advocate of those for years, because really, when it comes right down to it, most of the e-learning applications have not even gone that far. They usually just give PowerPoint types of presentations, linear types of things, and so up until not too long ago, case-based scenarios were pretty much the epitome of doing e-learning right. But now we've thought about this a lot and started implementing. One of the things that all self-paced learning lacks, that you do get in a classroom setting, of course, is that there's an instructor in the classroom that you can ask questions to, that can ask you questions and gets you involved, and also maybe role plays with you. You're the doctor, I'm the patient. You're the salesperson, I'm the client. That sort of thing. So you get that human element there. Chatbots help to fill that gap, because if a properly written chatbot can seem as if they are the patient or the doctor or the salesperson or the vendor, and you're communicating. And as Margie said, the brain has a difficult time distinguishing between that and a real person who might be there as well. So it's really, I'm really excited about this, because I've been doing this since '83, as I said, long time, and I love seeing how new technologies can be put into play to make learning better. Some of the particulars we're going to be covering, obviously how to build this, and we're looking at least 3 different tool or engines to do this with, most of which are free or low cost. The mechanism for doing that, and what Margie's going to be bringing to that is the whole side of the design and the theory behind it, so that it makes sense, because just showing you how to build something isn't really very conducive unless you can see how to apply it. So we're going to be building together at least 3 different examples during class to show how to implement these kinds of things in your own learning. And yes, as Margie said, it can be used in multiple ways. In fact, once you create one of these, you can distribute it over many, many channels. You can put it directly into Captivate or Storyline, Lectora, any authoring tool pretty much that allows for web windows and so on to be incorporated. But also you could do the same exact, chatbot over Alexa, over Skype, over Siri, just about anything that allows for that sort of thing. So it's really cool that you can capitalize so much on the work that's being done by disseminating it in many different ways as well.
You do realize, now that you've mentioned that name, that
Which one?
person is now chatting in my background. The name that you mentioned, beginning with A, and I won't repeat it
Yes.
because you'll start up again.
Her Amazon friend. Yes.
Are you saying that my Alexa will start to say something?
She started talking when you said that. Yeah.
All she did was rotate the light there for a second and didn't respond. So I think she's getting smarter about that sort of
My
thing.
one did. My one did in the UK.
Really?
So you are controlling mine.
Yeah.
Very good. I actually went to Italy recently and brought with me an Amazon Echo, one of the small ones, to my sister, because I had already purchased one for my wife that she uses, and I won this one at a conference. And it's not very expensive; it's $30 or something, but still. And I brought it to my sister's house, and when she hooked it up and we started using it, it instantly started speaking in Italian because it knew its location, and I thought that was interesting. But then I also decided to try something. I asked the Echo in English. I asked, how are you today? And using her name. And she responded in Italian, a very interesting phrase. She said, in Italian, she said, "I am well today, thank you. But I really prefer speaking in Italian. It's such a beautiful language, very nuanced. Even though I was born in Seattle, in Washington State, I really prefer speaking Italian." And I thought, wow, that somebody put some thought into that.
Fun.
And that's really the same kind of thing that we're talking about here when we're talking about building these chatbots to anticipate this sort of thing. And the beauty of it is when the Echoes first came out, they were a lot dumber. They gotten smarter over time because that's exactly the same mechanism that's used for chatbots. The first time you introduce one, you may not have thought about all the, anticipated all the possible inputs and things that people might say to it or type into it, depending on the mechanism used. But as you start to see that, and there's all these analytics behind it, so you can start to look at, look what people are typing or what they're saying, and then you improve it. And it's not that hard to improve these things day by day, week by week, month by month. Next thing you know, this thing has gotten really smart. It's able to anticipate a lot of things. That's a good example of something that they probably anticipated. Some smart aleck asking in English when they're in Italy. So I just thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, thank you for that. The other thing we're excited about, too, when you talk about them getting smarter and smarter, is they help you get smarter and smarter as a learning professional because of the analytics that are just native to the technology and the fact that, it's already baked in. So you can see what questions people asked. You can put questions in to ask, was this answer helpful to you? You can see what paths they go down in a scenario. And so all of that starts to build a really robust set of information, and you can use it to tweak the chatbot really on a daily basis if you want to. And Joe, I know you've done a lot of thinking about that, so you might want to add some more specifics there about how people are going to do that.
Well, you're absolutely right. One of the things that is lacking in typical e-learning, we have SCORM, we have XAPI, we have other ways of seeing, how people are doing in their courses, but we really don't have any very natural, what's the word I'm looking for, a very organic, natural way of communicating with learners. We're basically just seeing the results of them taking a course or a lesson somewhere. When that, did they do well? Did they do badly? That sort of thing. But when you're talking about a chatbot, you're talking about a very in real time, very organic type of back and forth. The feedback going back and forth. So when they communicate with the chatbot, it's amazing how much more information you can get from that than just looking at the stats coming out of an LMS or a learning record store. So it's really fun stuff, but also really, really insightful. And as Margie said, it helps us become better and better as well, because we can actually see what is on the minds of these learners, rather than just looking at the results of what they might have done using our canned learning. Nothing wrong with, by the way, with that. It's still necessary, but to be able to incorporate this element into that can lead to lots more insight than you could possibly get just without it.
It's interesting. It's interesting you say that, Joe, because I was at an event yesterday in London. It's the eLearning Network event. It was their annual conference, and they were talking about data analytics and what people measure and what people look at and everything else. And I was sitting next to one of our trustees, and the quote came up, something about measuring the number of courses that learners have done, or bums on seats. And I said to the trustee next to me, I said, yeah, if you're measuring bums on seats, you're measuring and you're focusing on the wrong end of the learner. And he just burst out laughing. And he then tweeted that. He's put it on LinkedIn. And the number of likes that it got. And to be honest, I can't actually remember who said that to me, but it goes back to my very, very, very early days when I was teaching. And it was, I was lecturing in community education, and it was one of the senior lecturers said to me, "You mustn't focus on bums on seats. It's the wrong end of the learner, Leslie." And that has just stuck with me over the years.
That's amazing. I never thought about that. I've never heard that, and I'm going to steal it.
I love
definitely.
it.
It's a good one.
Oh no, by all means steal it. As I say, I genuinely can't remember which lecturer said it to me, but I'm going back to, it was in the 1980s. This lecturer said it to me. And what she was trying to say to me was that I shouldn't be counting just what students got in exams, just how many turned up to classes, what they got. I should be, if I was looking at what learning they were doing, I had to take it, particularly in vocational education, I had to take it one step further. And, it was such good advice that it's just stuck with me, but it was just so funny yesterday. And the number of likes it's got on Twitter and LinkedIn is just amazing.
That's funny.
The whole idea of data collection, data gathering, analysis has become huge. Much. It's absolutely true that we borrow from other fields, the technology, when we see how it can be applied, of course, to our field. And data analytics has been huge in so many sectors, but only maybe in the last 4 to 5 years has it really become prominent now, or at least being looked at prominently in our field of learning. And there's no reason why it shouldn't be, because it is absolutely essential to understand, as much as possible about what we're doing. So much money is being wasted in creating learning that just is not very effective, but we don't know that it's not effective. We can feel it in our gut, but we don't really have the proof, any evidence of that, because we don't have the stats, right? And as you said, the bums and seats. I guess we have to use butts and seats in America, because bums and seats sounds like hobos maybe sitting in chairs. The idea then is,
I just think it's a great quote.
Sorry?
By all means use butts on seats, transfer it. I just think it's a great quote. And
it really is. And it just underlines the fact that we really have to understand what the learner, what's in
what is it you're
all the
actually
time.
measuring?
Yeah. So
what is it you're measuring? What analytics are you actually measuring? And are you measuring the right ones?
A long time ago, in 1990, I started doing a course in Spanish language training for government officials here. And for 2 years, I worked on that. It was my first project using AuthAware. That was in 1990. In May, I started. And for 2 years, I worked on that project. The government agency I was working in had an office that they called the analytics office. And this was all about learning. So even back then, they were thinking about, analyzing this. The interesting thing about that was that for the 2 years I was there, they never put out any information. They just kept analyzing things all the time. And in the end, they were closed down because they were just wasting money. They just kept analyzing things. They were true analysts. They analyzed, but they never actually put out anything that was of use to anybody. So, what they call that, analysis paralysis, I think they call it. You could analyze things too much to the point where you really are paralyzed. You're not really using that information in any viable way. So it's very important to find that balance between, yes, we have to have as much data as possible, know how to curate it so that we can analyze the important aspects of it, not get down into the nitty-gritty, details that may not be very important, but start looking at the big picture. And then, once you see what's happening, then you can start digging down in those areas that you're seeing, I need more information on this or that. But trying to analyze every data point all the time and then getting lost in the forest just doesn't really work.
The other thing that came up at the event was, when you've got all this analytics, so what was the next question? So what? And then the one after that was, so what next? And that was the three things that came up. It was a chap called Robin Hoyle. I don't know if you've ever come across Robin, but he's worth checking out. And I've known Robin for many a long year as well. And it was, when he was summarizing, it was, saying, but you've got all this data. So what? What next? What does it mean?
Well, when you bring that up, Joe, as far as analytics and what they're used for, we had a meeting with one of our clients earlier where the client said, we trained 4,000 people in this last 6 months or whatever. And I said, and very happy with it. I said, what were the performance increases? There was no performance increase. They didn't know. They couldn't measure it. How does that tie into, KPIs, key performance indicators? And it's one of those things that in the e-learning industry, or the learning industry period, they're not tying the training back often, and this happens everywhere, to any productivity increases, performance, productivity increases. How do we know we're doing anything? How do we know training is making any difference whatsoever? And they don't in many cases. It's sort of I think it did well. Well, yeah, but how did it do well? Can you measure it? No. But they can. It's just that they're not using the data for anything that may be useful. Now, Joe, I have a question for you. Oh, go ahead,
Rick, something just sparked and reminded me that another great use of it, a chatbot that we're seeing more of, and one of my clients does, is in performance support. So rather than just have them experience that chatbot in a learning experience, it's there on their desktop, and it's smart enough to tell by the keystrokes what they're trying to do, and will pop up if they appear to be struggling. It'll say, hi, can I help you find something? If they're in an application, it can offer to tell them the next step or to walk through the process with them. It can provide a link to more information or policy. And so you don't always even have to use these in the middle of what we would think of as a formal training program. It can be learning on the job, learning in the moment, by having that performance coach kind of right at your shoulder, just when you need it. And where the artificial intelligence part comes in is being smart enough through after subsequent use in test runs to recognize when someone needs help, even when they may not ask. They can always ask, but even if they don't, they're going to get that offer, just like, kind of going back to our first point, just like a human being might if they were sitting next to you watching you struggle.
Now, I just thought of something. I'll mention before I forget. Have you folks read any of Dan Brown's books? Da Vinci Code.
Sure.
All of them.
Now,
Yeah.
so you probably read last year. He came out with one that was fascinating. It was called Origin, and it was all about artificial intelligence, religion. There was a lot of questions in the book, but the use of artificial intelligence was really fascinating. And as the story evolved, and what was and what wasn't artificial intelligence. But that was a very well written book on the subject, which covered a lot of different subjects. But artificial intelligence, AI, was definitely a part of it. It was pretty interesting. I have a question for you, Joe. For example, on the latest iPhone, we were talking about iPhones pre-show. If you look at Siri, and I hope she doesn't come on because I said the name, she's much more natural now, much more than the Google Assistant or even the Amazon one. And I'm not saying names because they do kick off. And it's fascinating. Like, you'll say the name, and if you pause for a second, you'll hear, like they're talking to you. It's like, what can I do for you? Or there's a lot more natural language built into the algorithms of how they respond, and a lot more human, a lot more friendly, a lot more natural in the way. And a couple of times it's had me giggling big time because it'll say something that's just out of the ordinary. And at that point, you really start going, okay, it's not real, but it is real in its programming. Which brings back the concept of emotions. Emotion in learning is often totally non-talked about. What about emotion in AI?
Well, that's very interesting, and I know, Margie, you definitely want to touch upon this on the neuroscience side as well. Emotion. What you're really referring to here is emotion that stems from having a normal conversation with another human being, and that's where these bots are becoming smarter and are sounding better all the time. And that's part of one of the most crucial things about chatbots is that they have natural language processing algorithms that really work, meaning that they understand you and that they're able to respond in a way that sounds natural as well. And sounding natural means that it's going to sound not quite robotic, that it's going to have those hems and haws and sometimes hey and these kinds of utterances. There was a real good case this year, and I forget exactly when it happened, but it was this year sometime, where they tested, I think it was Google, tested a system where you were calling for a reservation at a restaurant, and it wasn't a real human on the other end, but it sounded so human, and they never let on. So it sounded really human, and she was doing the same thing. She was like, hey, let me check on that, and what day did you want to come in? Let me, what, and how many people? And she was talking as if she was, a young lady receptionist type of thing. So it was fascinating because, yes, that's what's happening right now. I want to touch upon two quick things here. We were talking about so what, right? We were saying, well, so what, all this analytics? Well, I'd like to ask, well, so what to other areas, the banking analytics, so what? The so what question actually can be pretty easily answered in most cases. It's just that we don't really ever think about asking that question to other sectors out there besides learning, right? It's kind of silly. I'm reading a book right now that I'm finding absolutely fascinating. It's a brand new book, came out this year by Kate Fazzini. It's called Kingdom of Lies, and it's all about cybersecurity. It reads like a novel, but it's absolutely based on things that have happened in the last few years, with cybersecurity and cyber crimes and such. One of the most important things is that I'm noticing in a book that I've also noticed in learning is very important is adding the human element. In other words, it's not just talking about cybercrime, it's actually talking about people that have committed crimes, people who are fighting this on the other side, real names, real, people, what their thought processes were, making that the human element. And we really, really gravitate and respond to that. If we hear stories, it's always because if we like stories, and almost always it's a good idea to have stories in your learning, it's because the stories include humans, human thoughts, human actions, that sort of thing. it turns out that we as humans actually, like talking about ourselves a lot. So it's an important thing. And what you mentioned about how difficult it can be to measure whether you're having a real impact on productivity from the learning, some of that stems from the fact that sometimes the learning happens weeks or months before you really see any productivity gains, and then you start asking, well, is that because of the learning, or is it because of some new sales technique that was introduced later, or something else happened? There could be so many reasons why productivity has increased. So lately, in the last few years, I'm noticing that a lot more care has been taken into trying to isolate these things in a way. And yes, of course, and intuitively, we know that if you learn how to do something well, later, you're going to see a benefit reap from that. But now it's happening much more. They're focusing much more on that as well. And the last thing I want to say about this is, you reminded me of my good friend in New Zealand who has an e-learning company there, and he was asked to evaluate the first e-learning effort of a company there. They called him and said, hey, we just finished it, we delivered it, it's gone well, but we'd like to know how to make the next one even better. Would you come in and talk to us about it? And he said, sure, can you send me a link to it? I'll go through the course first. And they did. And it was a short thing, it was 17 minutes long. He went in and started talking to them and said, and before they could ask him any questions, he started asking them questions. He said, first of all, how long is this lesson? And they said, it's about 17 minutes. He goes, yeah, that's how long it took me to go through it from start to finish, looking at everything, etc. Now, tell me, how long did the average learner go through it? And he said, what do you mean? And he said, well, just have you looked at the stats on that? Have you seen how long the average learner took to go through it? And they said, well, it would be 17 minutes. They said, well, not necessarily. Why don't we take a look? And so they did, and they were shocked. They said 2.7 minutes? That was the average learner, because all they were doing is hitting next, next, next. And they said, well, but maybe it's okay, because after all, there was a quiz at the end, and they all passed it, so it worked. And he said, well, okay, let's look at that now. How many times did the average learner go through the quiz? And he said, well, you could take it as many times as needed. Okay. The average learner took it 4.5 times. There were only 5 questions on the test. And so they were just basically not even reading it. They were just seeing which ones they got wrong and choosing the next one in turn, etc. And they were pretty shocked. They said, we spent $37,000 to create this. And it didn't work, because they weren't looking at those data at all at first. They just assumed that everybody completed it and everybody passed, so that was all that was needed. Nope, not at all. Now, I don't think I even answered your question.
That's the other one. That's the other one I'd say, Joe. That's the other one I say. My first boss told me never to assume. It makes an ass out of you and me.
That's a well-known phrase. Yeah, that one I know.
Yeah. That one plays over here as well, Leslie.
Yep.
I did want to jump in, as Joe knows me well, on the emotional discussion. The neuroscientist Paul Zak, his study is he's made it his life's work to study the emotions and the role that neurotransmitters have in triggering our reward circuit and other circuits that cause us to feel or interpret those signals as different emotions. And for example, oxytocin makes us feel great, is responsible for the runner's high, and that same emotion triggers the aha response when you learn something new. Learning is supposed to feel wonderful. And so something that he's fond of, since we are using a lot of our favorite quotes today, is he often says all learning is emotional, and he is absolutely right. There is always some emotional response. Now let's take a look at the example that Joe just had. That emotional response was they actually did teach them something. They taught them that this particular course is boring and they should get out of it as soon as possible. And here's how you do it. And unfortunately, that taught those learners also to expect another boring experience the next time they get training from their company that is delivered in the same way. So there was always, and they may have felt emotions of anger or frustration, boredom, but they certainly didn't feel that, aha, I learned something new. So whether you plan on it or not, you are going to generate an emotional response. You can't help it. The trick is to be very intentional about it, and in your design to think about what sort of emotion am I going for, and how do I create an experience that generates that emotion.
Yeah, and Margie, like you always talk about, without emotion, there's absolutely no retention.
That's
we
right.
remember
Exactly.
things that affect us emotionally. We don't remember much of anything else.
Yeah.
I haven't even told you this, Margie, yet, but I just found this in the library. It caught my eye, and I haven't read it yet. I just got it out. It's. Can you read that?
Oh yeah, look at that.
Let me put it. What neuroscience
Joy,
can and
guilt,
can't
anger,
tell us
love.
about how we feel.
Yeah.
Joy, guilt, anger, love, by Giovanni Frazzetto. And I just glanced at it, and it sounds really interesting because it covers anger, guilt, anxiety, grief, empathy, joy, and love, and all about, how is it that our brains work in that regard. So I'm looking forward to reading it as soon as I finish the book I'm reading now. So it's not a new concept, but, well, not necessarily new, but it's certainly getting more focused now as well.
We should subtitle that book, What's eLearning Done for You Lately?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. And this is something that neuroscience is really bringing to the learning profession, is there are things that we have known intuitively, or we have suspected through theories that have come to us through educational psychology, but we haven't been able to demonstrate them in a living brain until we had the powerful analytical tools and scanning tools that we have to watch healthy live brains in the learning process, so we can see where information is stored. We can see the brain connecting multiple parts together to come up with an answer. So we now know the memories aren't stored in just one place in the brain. They're distributed throughout, and that makes it much easier for us to retain it. So those kind of insights, it's not that they make, sometimes people get into a debate about whether neuroscience is actually contributing anything new, or if this was all stuff we knew already. Well, I like to say what it does is validate it, because now we have hard evidence as opposed to suspecting it's true. We now have validation that it's true. We can actually see it happening. And in a few cases, like in the case of learning styles, for example, the science has actually disproven something that seemed so logical and that a lot of people wanted to believe, that turned out to have really no basis, in fact. So there's a great benefit in following the science and staying on top of it. We just have to recognize that science is an evolving understanding of the world. It's never set in one place. And so every new study has the potential to change our minds about something. And that's how science works in all its forms. And neuroscience is no different.
And if you look at neuroscience and where it's come, really, it's only been about 40, maybe a little more than that, years. Mm-hmm. We didn't have the technology before. We didn't. That's right. We couldn't see the brain. Doctor, are you familiar with Dr. Amen? I think it's Richard Amen. I think his name is Richard.
Yes, he's the one that's done all the scans.
Yes, he's done thousands, 40, 50,000 scans.
Yeah.
And he has been able to identify, like he says, there's not one type of ADHD, something that affects learners a lot. There's about 7 types. And when they give medicine for ADHD, it's really for one type. And he goes, it's totally useless. It doesn't help the patients. Most psychiatrists never take a scan, so they have no idea what's going on in the brain, what's good, what's deficient, where the connections are, how the neurons are firing. And Amen, ex-military, he was a colonel in the Army, I believe. Walter Reed is where he worked and did a lot of research. And he just said, once, if you can't, take a picture of it and figure out what's alive and not in the brain, then you have no idea what you're actually prescribing medicine for. And then, of course, taking that one step.
You wouldn't do it in other parts of the body.
and you take that one step further. Most of the medical, let's say the pharma drugs that affect mental illness, they don't even really know how they work. Not yet.
Scary.
Not yet. They have an idea. It kind of affects something, but maybe it doesn't. We're not there yet. We're probably 10, 20 years away from being there, if we ever get there, because the brain's pretty complex in certain things, but we're getting better at it. It's really a fascinating subject, and I think we're only going to get better at figuring out what's going on and everything else.
Really, the whole point of a lot of this, I mean, if you look at it from the practical standpoint, is
I'm sorry, guys. I'm going to have to shoot off. So I'm going to have to love you and leave you, I'm afraid.
Okay, well, we're wrapping up anyway, so we'll see you next
Take care. Lovely to chat to you. Bye.
I guess I'll leave with this thought then. Really, the whole point of this is, from the practical standpoint, is, again, to try to save time and money. Why pursue an avenue that's not going to really help? Why waste money on that? Too much money, millions and millions and millions of dollars every year spent on things that aren't really working very well. And the problem is that most of the time the learning aspect of in an organization is considered a cost center. Really, it should be a profit center. It should where by having people learn, you're increasing profits. And one of the reasons why it isn't seen that way more often is that no good analytics are happening, and so we're not really seeing the value there.
Well, also people are brainwashed and people are brainwashed into believing they're cost centers. They don't understand the overall how they fit in a corporation. They don't get what their role is more often than not, and therefore they're a cost center. No, you're right. It is a profit center if done right.
Exactly, and that's what we're trying to do, is make sure it's done right, so people can legitimately defend the cost involved in creating some of this, which isn't that high, honestly. No. And then be able to prove that it really works.
Well, and speaking of costs, you can you can replace your investment in learning how to build your chatbots by the time that you're going to save building them yourself as opposed to outsourcing it. Because we learned as we were surveying this that there's a lot of opportunity to pay people to do things that you might be able to do yourself with just a couple tips and a little bit of practice and maybe some handy reference tools.
And also our tools being sold that purport to help you in that regard, they could be useful, but like any tool, they will limit you to a certain area if you don't. But by being able to learn how to do it yourself, which isn't that hard to learn, you really have no limit. So,
good talk, good conversation. And by the way, you have a seminar coming up. Is it January?
In January and again in March. We got a lot of interest, and so we added more dates. And anybody who goes to the site today may only see the first date, but I am feverishly working on getting those new dates in there. So if you're interested in the meantime, let's pull up our contact information. If you want more information from me or Joe, I don't know, do we have time for that?
We do. What was the date of the first seminar?
Let's see, January.
Hold on, I
believe it's January 14th.
Yeah,
going off my memory here. My brain is trying to retrieve that neural pathway right now.
Where are you holding that one?
That's online. It's online.
So it is online. Oh, that's an online one. Great. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So,
January 13th is what I have. Is that right?
Honestly, Joe, I'm not in front of my computer, so I don't know. You're probably right.
It's either January 13th or 14th. We'll have to figure that one out. But yes, it's on the site right now. So if you go there, you'll find it.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And you're certainly welcome to contact either one of us to get more information about any of this.
That sounds great.
Yeah, thank you.
We always appreciate having you both on, and most success on the webinars and seminars you're planning on doing. It's a great subject, great topic, and I know people can benefit from it.
Much appreciated, Rick. Always nice to see you.
Same here. Well, have a good one, everyone. And if you're watching the show, there'll be information on Margie and Joe below in the show notes. So take a look at that and go visit their sites and attend the webinar. It'll be good. And again, what was the name of the book that you just came out with?
Sorry, which book are you talking about?
Margie's book?
My book that Joe so nicely showed. It's called Brain Matters, How to Help Anyone Learn Anything Using Neuroscience.
That's great.
It's available on Amazon.
Amazon. Kindle too?
Yes, absolutely. Paperback and Kindle.
Good. I like Kindle.
It's in color.
I'll be getting that.
It's in color.
And it's in color. Right. Nice.
Yeah,
anyway.
pictures.
Cool. Well, anyway, have a good one, everyone. Thanks for watching the show. If you want, please subscribe. We appreciate it. And give us feedback on the shows. And definitely have a conversation below with the folks on the show today and attend the webinar. Have a good one. Take care. Bye-bye. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.